This episode is sponsored by Kendo UI. Kendo UI allows you to build better apps faster. They have a comprehensive library ranging from data grids and charts to buttons and sliders. Plus, you can use their components as plain JavaScript as well as in Angular, React, and Vue. They have a large collection of customizable popular themes like Bootstrap and Material. Go check them out at reactroundup.com/KendoUI. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. Today I am talking to Ed Thomson. We're live at Microsoft Ignite. Ed, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Yeah, it's fun to just talk about this stuff. I'm really curious if you could just tell people who you are, what you work on.
Absolutely. Yeah, my name's Ed Thomson. I'm a program manager for the Azure DevOps team.
Okay.
And so you just had Donovan on.
Yeah. Talked to him about 20 minutes ago.
That's awesome. Yeah. So I won't give you the pitch on what Azure DevOps is because
Right.
I'm sure that Donovan did a good job explaining.
Yeah, folks, rewind 2 episodes and you'll get that one.
Excellent. So I work mostly on Azure repos, which is the Git hosting side of Azure DevOps, and then Azure pipelines, which is our continuous integration and continuous delivery build and release service. And
good deal.
Yeah, it's really exciting. So I'm happy that it's now like its own kind of separate thing. So part of the move from Visual Studio Team Services into Azure DevOps was like taking these into individual components so that if somebody is using, I don't know, Jira for their work item tracking and GitHub for their source code, they could still adopt Azure pipelines without having to, adopt the rest of Visual Studio Team Services.
Right.
So now that they're separate services, I think it's really great.
Yeah, Donovan basically pointed out that you can go into your UI and just turn off all the menus for all that stuff.
That's right.
You don't even have to see it. If you're not using it, you don't have this bloated UI.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I think a lot of people would look at Visual Studio Team Services and think that they had to adopt it all. And so
it's an easy thing to do. I mean,
yeah.
This is the problem I have with IDEs in general, is that there are about 100 million features that I don't use, and then about 6 that I use all the time, and probably another 10 or so that I use on occasion.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So
that the goal was to do exactly that, to just kind of, make it easier to get to those features that you do use.
Yep. Makes sense. So repos and pipelines.
Yes.
I'm going to dive right in.
Okay.
So let's talk first about repos, because I think that's something that everybody's familiar with.
Sure. Absolutely.
So Microsoft just acquired GitHub. So are you cannibalizing GitHub? I mean, I don't know.
So technically, I've got to say this. Technically, we have not yet acquired GitHub.
Okay.
We announced that we were going to acquire GitHub. There's all sorts of
Oh yes, that's right.
Regulatory and all. It takes a while to actually.
We've had some GitHub folks on the show too, and they're like, well, it's not done, and we have to operate like we're independent companies.
That's
and,
right.
Yeah, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I've got to say that. So
yeah, it's the end of September right now as we record this. So it may have gone through by the time this goes live. We'll see.
Cool. Well, if so, awesome.
I don't know what that
I'm going to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well,
No.
I think it'll come out end of October.
Okay.
But, yeah, I don't know what the timeline's. Anyway.
So Azure repos and GitHub are definitely going to remain independent things, at least for a while, because they're both very good at different things. So GitHub, obviously, it's the home for open source. Azure repos, though, we use it within Microsoft in a very different way to how we could use GitHub. We have huge repositories in there, like Windows. Windows is the biggest Git repository in the world. We had to do all these. Oh man, it's crazy. Yeah. So there are 4,000 engineers working in the Windows repository on a day-to-day basis. And
wow, that sounds like a nightmare.
I wouldn't say it's a nightmare, because everybody works in their own little areas.
But you have to highly coordinate stuff.
Yeah. But their Git repository is several hundred gigabytes. So, yeah, it's insane. So we had to do all this engineering to support that.
Right.
Because Git itself out of the box just doesn't cope. So we built this tool called VFS for Git. It's the virtual file system for Git. And it basically, when you run clone on this repository, it doesn't clone down everything. It doesn't bring down all of the source code. It doesn't bring down all of the history, because that would be immense.
Right.
And
that's what it does on my machine when I use it.
That's right. And we do that with all our other repositories except Windows. Okay. Windows is this special thing that we created VFS for Git for. And this was a real challenging, hardcore thing, engineering effort between the Windows team and us. So there's like kernel modules involved. It's insane. And so when you clone the Windows repository down, what you get is nothing. It actually doesn't download any files. It finishes in like, I don't know, a couple minutes. And
here be placeholders.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. And when you run dir, you see that the files are there, but they're not. And when you go to open them, it kind of pages them in on demand.
Right.
Kind of like OneDrive, the OneDrive thing that does that same thing. It's the same idea. In fact, it's a lot of the same technology. OneDrive on demand, I think it's called. And so, so that's VFS for Git, and that's the sort of thing that that Azure Repos supports that nobody else does.
Right.
So we're not going to like start mixing and matching, and they're going to remain independent.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So, but it's a great question. I'm super excited to see GitHub as part of Microsoft. So I actually used to work at GitHub. So I'm really excited to see all those people come back and be closer organizationally to me. But yeah, no, I think GitHub will just kind of stay its own thing for a little while.
Yeah, it's funny talking about GitHub too, because I remember when Chris and Tom were talking about it at RubyConf and RailsConf.
Right.
So
right, it's come a long way.
It certainly has. It's a force to be reckoned with now. But,
that's the truth.
Yeah. Anyway, so beyond the VFS,
right?
I mean, are we talking about any other features, or is it just basically Git and then all the other features come in with the rest of Azure DevOps?
Yeah, I mean, we do have some sort of unique features, I guess. We've got like branch policies, which I guess now most people have, but I think our branch policies were perhaps one of the first iterations. So you can require that people use pull requests, that you can't just run git push master, git push origin master, and have it do something. You've got to use pull requests, and like your CI has to build and pass and those sorts of things. So I think there's a lot of richness in our auditing and our like compliance framework that we build around that. So we've got some real enterprise focused Git functionality. But at its core, it's still just Git. Right. So that's the great thing about everybody using Git is we've kind of standardized on this version control system, and so we can all interoperate. It's great.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And for people who haven't set up their own Git server, and I'm not talking about like go find like the GitLab install or whatever, just setting up Git.
Right.
It's a half hour and a little bit of work on Bash.
It definitely is. And that's if you're on like Linux.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. If you're on Windows, it's even worse.
It's a little more involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm afraid so. Because it's not like you can just set up Apache.
Right.
Yeah. You got to figure out how to make it work with IIS, which I tried to do once, and then I installed the STS instead. So.
Yeah, well, the way that I've done it, you use the SSH method of pushing and pulling.
Sure.
But yeah. So yeah, it's always more interesting to talk about Git in terms of what people have built on top of it than.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
So you can set up repos. I talked to Donovan. I just want to clarify a couple of things for folks. You can try Azure DevOps for free.
Yes.
Up to 5 users, and you get unlimited private repos.
You do.
Which is something that I know that some people are interested in outside of GitHub, because GitHub makes you pay for them.
That it does. Yeah. Yeah. So unlimited private repos for up to 5 users, and public repos too, of course.
Right.
But.
Yeah, and I've also used Bitbucket, but I hated it. So
I'm sorry to hear that. I kind of like, there's some things I like about Bitbucket.
I liked it. I like having private repos. I hated their UI. Anyway, so let's dive into pipelines then.
Yeah, pipelines is, I think, some of the most interesting stuff that our team is doing right now.
Okay.
We've revamped our entire pipelines experience, so build and release, and so it's super easy to get started. We support either a visual designer, so you can kind of like click through and define the way your build works,
right? Or
YAML, and so that's kind of new for us. We released that. I guess it's been a few months now, actually, but that lets you define your build with configuration as code,
right?
So you can check it in. right alongside your code. Super helpful, super straightforward. I think that's a best practice, but not everybody likes it. Some people like the whiz-bang GUI. That's fine too. And then releases, once your code is built, we'll get it out to production, whether that's in Azure or another cloud provider or an on-prem solution. So it's the important part of getting your code out of your repository and into production.
Right. So how do you recommend people get started then with continuous integration?
I think the easiest, it depends on where your repo is. The easiest thing to do...
Assume
GitHub. The easiest thing to do is go to the GitHub Marketplace, click Continuous Integration, click Azure Pipelines, and you're pretty much done.
Right.
So we've got an extension in the GitHub Marketplace to get you into Azure Pipelines and get your build done. And it's super straightforward. It'll look at your code. If it sees a package.json, it's like, oh, I know what that is. I know how to build that. And it'll give you a YAML build script ready to go.
Right.
So I don't know, maybe not everybody's doing stuff with JavaScript, so it'll look for MS build files. So if you're using .NET, it knows how to build that.
Right.
So it's super straightforward, and then it'll just hook up a little build notification, so when you do a pull request, it'll kick off a build in Azure Pipelines.
Right.
Yeah, and report all that back. And it'll set up continuous integration on the master branch. So super straightforward to get started.
That makes sense. What if I'm using like a back end and a front end? So let's say I'm building like a Rails app or a Phoenix app.
Cool. Yeah.
With Vue or React or something on the front end.
Yeah. So it depends on how you've got that sort of organized. Are they in two repositories, or is it
one repository?
One repository?
Yeah, let's say one repository.
Okay.
Two repositories is like, hey, you run yours and you run yours.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's when you're going to have to do a little hand hacking on the YAML. And there's a lot of different opportunities there. You can instrument this with a build script. If you've just got a bash script that does the builds for you, it's as easy as just telling pipelines to run that script. If not, you can certainly orchestrate it so that you've got two builds going in parallel, one for each. Yeah, and that way, reduce the time it takes. And if this is an open source project, then you actually get 10 free pipelines in parallel. So there's 2. What are you going to do with the other 8?
I'm sure people can come up with something.
Yeah, you got all sorts of great ideas.
Mine Bitcoin.
You'd be surprised. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't be surprised. People try to sneak that in there.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
No.
So you just set it up and run it. It seems like continuous integration isn't a whole lot more complicated than run these scripts that run my tests.
So that's the way I do it, because I'm a pretty simple guy. But yeah, some people have like some crazy pipelines they've got set up, because we allow you to. It's a very abstract sort of workflow engine at its core.
Right.
So you can say, well, once these steps are done, then go do this step, and then do these steps in parallel while that's going on. So you can do some really advanced stuff, and some people like the Visual Studio Code team are doing some pretty cool things. If I recall, the Cake build system is doing some crazy things. They're building like on all these crazy platforms all at once. Because we've got hosted in the cloud, we've got Windows, of course, because we're Microsoft, Linux and Mac OS build agents. But you can do even cooler things like spin up a QEMU instance on one of those machines and then run other platforms entirely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Are you building for, Raspberry Pis? That's cool. Use our existing x86 or AMD 64 build hosts, and then run an emulator for ARM, and it'll spit out an ARM binary. It's crazy. So some people are doing some cool things.
That's amazing.
It's not just necessarily running a script, although that's certainly the easy thing to do.
Right. So, some people get pretty complicated. They're writing React. They're writing it in, like, TypeScript or ES6.
Sure.
They've got to compile it and then test it.
Yeah.
And, so it can get complicated.
It can.
Maybe have it build sprites or, who knows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, TypeScript, no problem.
So how much work do you have to do in order to set up a pipeline like that?
Well, it's a good question. So most of my experience here is with like NPM.
Right.
Right. So if you've got let's say you're compiling TypeScript, let's say you're building some sprites, that's probably already captured in your NPM description, right? So if I run NPM build,
Right.
okay, there you go. Have your pipeline run NPM build, have your pipeline run NPM test, done. So it's since you've already got that stuff set up, I mean, what I recommend to people is always just have your pipeline do exactly what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Right, that makes sense. So can I tell it to do npm build on one task and an npm test on the other, or
You can, yeah.
make one, if one fails, it doesn't do the other?
That's exactly right. And that's now here's where this gets contentious because the other members of my team like this all-in-one step. They want one task that is npm build, npm test. I like two steps. And this is the arguments that we have at work. I know. We actually get along pretty well around the office, it turns out. So just because I want to see each individual step, which one fails. If you have them all bundled together.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Where did it break?
Yeah, exactly. But our default task out of the box, they won this argument, and so it does them all in one step. However, of course, it won't still try to run the tests if the build fails. Yeah.
But if you're crazy like me, and I want two steps, I can do that.
I do too. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. It's super straightforward. Yeah, because my build is TypeScript. I want to see if it was the TypeScript that failed.
Right.
That compiler's picky. So
we need to get Anders in here and tell him about it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, it's hard.
Yeah. Writing code is hard.
Yeah.
Yep.
So once you have it all built and tested and you're happy with that, continuous deployment.
Yes. Continuous deployment is as easy as setting up your credentials and telling it what your Azure endpoint and how to get it there. Of course, not everybody uses Azure, it turns out. So
really?
I know. I'm sad to hear that. But no,
I'm just kidding. I don't use Azure.
No, that's fine. So there's actually an AWS extension in the Azure DevOps marketplace. So we worked with Amazon to do that, and yeah, it's super straightforward to just set up whatever your endpoint is. It doesn't have to be Azure. Obviously, I hope it is, but it doesn't have to be. And yeah, you just need to give it your credentials, and boom. If you have maybe you're deploying on premises, maybe you've got some legacy stuff that stays inside your firewall. That's no problem either. There's a lot of options to get it deployed there. You can either set up, put an agent on that machine, and it's a very straightforward. It's actually a mix of .NET Core and Node. So
interesting.
Yeah, our build agent has a bunch of JavaScript in it, but it's super straightforward to just set that up on a machine on-prem
and then it just pulls it.
Yeah. And if you don't want to do that, I mean that's the easiest way. But if you don't want to do that, you could poke a hole in your firewall and SCP that stuff over. But don't poke holes in your firewall. Just run the agent and yeah. But we give you a lot of flexibility in how you do that deployment.
So you could give it like VPN credentials and.
Yeah, you could. Oh man, yeah, you could. Just run the agent. It's no holes in the firewall. The agent connects to VSTS in the cloud, and we'll just pull down
pulls down whatever the CD system says is the latest.
That's exactly right. That's by far the simplest mechanism.
Right. So it's not pulling from master or anything crazy. It's actually checking in with the continuous deployment system and saying, "What's the latest? Okay, I want it."
That's exactly right. So what happens is, you'll do a CI build, and that CI build will stick something in our artifacts directory, right? It's like, okay, well, now I've got it. Maybe it produces a zip or something.
Right.
And then the release pipeline will say, hey, take that zip. Once it's signed off, there are various approval gates within the pipeline. So, you could require manual approvers. You could hit some, function, serverless functiony thing.
Check the alignment of the planets.
That's exactly right. Once the planets are finally aligned, it's time to do that deployment. And so the agent that's on your on-prem machine will grab that zip file that was produced and just deploy it. However that, usually unzip it into the right directory or whatever. Maybe you need to
restart the web server. Blah, 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 blah.
Exactly. It'll just run those steps.
What if I have so I host my stuff on DigitalOcean,
Okay.
and so for me, the way that I deploy currently is I just use Capistrano
Okay.
because it's Rails, and I just
Right.
so
Right.
it does the build on my machine, and then it pushes it up and then does the build on the server.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. That's it's been a while since I played with Capistrano, so I'd have to walk through a pipeline using it.
But any SSH system would work fine, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's
and the CD system will run Ruby. So
it will. Yes. Yeah. That's exactly right.
what about something crazy like I've been getting into Elixir and Phoenix?
Okay. Okay. That is a little outside my wheelhouse. What is Phoenix?
So Phoenix is a framework.
Okay.
It's a backend framework written in Elixir.
Okay. Okay.
Runs on the Erlang virtual machine.
That is crazy. So I haven't played with Erlang since I was at GitHub, and so it's been a while. But here's what we probably don't have is a lot of Erlang support in our hosted build agents. But what you can do is again just run a Docker image in it. So get your
you can do that.
Yeah. So we don't. Some CI providers give you basically a Docker image for yourself. We actually give you a virtual machine so that you can run Docker yourself. You can configure the actual VM any way you want to do it, and that's why you can do that emulation. But yeah, so a lot of times I will just set up a Docker image with all my dependencies in it. So I build a lot of C applications actually because I'm old, and
you don't look that old.
Well, I appreciate that. It's a healthy, cleansing, moisturizing routine.
It's the haircut.
Yeah, that's right. And that means just a ton of crazy dependencies and all this other stuff. So so I have a Docker image ready to go that just has my build environment set up, and that's how I run my build. And so once you start getting into things like languages like Erlang and platforms that get a little, I don't want to say obscure, but I'm going to say obscure because I can't think of a better word.
Not widely supported.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Well, even if somebody wanted to do some kind of custom compile of Node.js or something, right?
Yeah.
They could, and I don't see that outside the realm of possibilities depending on what your requirements are.
Right.
I mean, most people won't.
I think so.
But, let's just say it's a possibility. They have some specialized IoT setup or, something like that. And it's like we took the stripped down node and we stripped it down some more because we didn't need any of that stuff either.
Yeah. I think that's A, very clever, and B, definitely within the realm of possibility. Right. So, yeah. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah. So you just Docker it up or QMU or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really cool how much flexibility there is in these sorts of things.
Very interesting. One thing that I'm curious about is testing against Azure services.
Okay.
So, it's one thing to run it on my machine and have it, connect over the internet. And it's another thing when a lot of things connect nicely to each other when you're running them in Azure, right?
Yes.
And so if somebody does have an Azure setup, I'm assuming that everything just plays nice that way, but does it connect natively in the same way as it would once it's in the Azure cloud?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So it should is the short answer, but there are so many services that things get a little. I don't want to say
that's fair.
Yes, everything just always is identical and works perfectly. But by and large, I mean I'll give you a yes with an asterisk. Send me an email if I'm wrong, and we'll get you sorted out.
Right.
But yeah, that is the goal, is that everything just kind of fits nicely together.
Right. One other thing that I'm curious about is with deployments, especially continuous deployment. A lot of times, what you wind up with is you want something that's like sort of the test system. So I push something up, it goes to test, and then maybe it goes to staging so that QA personnel or the CEO or whoever's concerned about whatever can go and play with it without mucking with the production data.
Absolutely, yeah. So,
or maybe I have some regulatory thing on the production data where nobody's supposed to touch it.
Yeah, exactly. Right, and that does happen. So what I like to do is I actually have a CD pipeline set up for my website. Let me give you just pick an example. And so every time I merge something into master, the CI build picks that up, creates a build, and deploys to staging.
Right.
And then I've got an approval gate. And so for me, it's manual. I just click a button and say, okay, well, I'm happy with this. I've reviewed it in staging, and then that'll deploy to production.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be a manual gate necessarily. It could ping, somebody. It could send an email and wait for a reply.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Or text somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the really crazy things, I know a company who's in a very regulated industry,
right.
And they need a literal sign-off, not like a click a button. They want a signature on a piece of paper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, old school. So it integrates with one of these PDF.
DocuSign or something.
Yeah, I didn't want to say the name, but it might be that. Yeah, and so...
There are a few others out there, but they're the big dog. So,
exactly.
Yeah, fair enough.
So apparently you can REST API up some DocuSign endpoints. And
wow.
Yeah, so once that signature actually lands on that piece of paper, the release to production goes on. So
well, if it can call REST APIs for that, you can probably do just about anything.
You can do it. You can. Yeah. Somebody
deploy by tweet. I love it.
Deploy by tweet. And in fact, somebody has a sentiment analysis plugin. So if you're doing like a stage deployment, so you can like roll out to Canary, and if people on Twitter start like complaining about your service, you can stop the deployment. So,
oh really?
Yeah. So you can use these gates. Is sentiment analysis strong? Okay, I'll keep rolling out to various stages of production. If not, it'll stop it.
That's awesome.
It's unbelievable what people are doing with this.
Well, the thing is if it's something you care about and it's worth the time to spend figuring, sentiment analysis, for example, out, then why not?
Exactly.
And if you don't have to think about it, this is the thing for me, and I mentioned this on the show I did with Donovan, is that I've become very concerned with helping people have some freedom in what they're doing with their code, right? So am I working on projects I like to work on? Am I contributing to open source as much as I want to? Am I happy with my job? Do I have the flexibility I want in my job? Am I solving interesting problems? And a lot of that, some of that comes down to what don't I have to do that I hate doing, right? And so some of this could be fixing bugs. So you set up CI, right? And it checks the system and it says, do I have any bugs that I've anticipated could occur?
Right.
And then, continuous deployment. I don't want to think about when the code goes to the server.
Nope.
I just want it to go out. I've worked at companies where, hey guys, it's deploy day. We're going to order you pizza. We'll get you some rock stars because you're going to be here all freaking night.
Yeah.
And then, and that's how it goes. And, the odd deployment, we'd start deploying at 6 or whenever, or 8 or whenever we'd start PM. And occasionally we'd be home by 10, and most of the time we wouldn't.
Right.
And and that's the thing is you have all these tools that are set up. Some of the other things that I talked to Donovan about is as far as like your process and how you decide what to work on and who's working on what, how you coordinate, how you communicate. All these things play into it. And if you can just remove the pain points and the friction and get to where it's like, I just want to write, I want to write code. I just freaking want to write code. And I want a little bit of time to write code that the world can use. And then, these people are paying me, so I'll spend most of my time writing code for them.
Right.
And and so that's the power of this. Is it's just, hey, it caught the bug before I had to deal with it.
Exactly.
Cha-ching, saved me a couple hours.
It's incredibly
And your
powerful.
boss won't mind either if it saves you a couple hours, right?
That's right. Yeah, and that's the dream of computers, right? Is to actually make our lives easier.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, so many times, as an engineer, as a programmer, you feel beholden to the computer instead.
Yeah.
So anytime we can leverage computation and software to make our lives easier, I think we should.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right about catching bugs. You can. It's super easy in a CI system. It can be more than just build and test. You can add in static code analysis, which will catch bugs for you. And so my friends at Sonar Cloud are here this week as well. So I'm going to catch up with them. But we lay that into our build process because finding bugs as quickly as possible before they land in production means that avoids downtime. It avoids messy deployments.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is then you can start using some of those tools for the things that aren't messy downtime problems, like coding style and things like that, right? Where it's not a measurable, quantifiable slowdown per se.
Right.
But if the code's all formatted in the same way, then I can take mental shortcuts, and that makes it easier for me to do my job.
That's absolutely
And if you're worrying about those problems because you have the other ones mostly solved, then life gets a whole lot better.
Yeah. You're in a good place when you're starting to complain about tabs versus spaces.
Yeah.
So that's great. The other thing you can do is avoid security problems because if a static code analysis tool catches some likely integer overflow.
Right.
You've caught that before it went to production, and before
you are a C programmer.
I am a C programmer. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'm sorry.
It's just not something we usually run into in JavaScript.
No, I hear you. I was trying to come up with a better example.
Totally fair.
And I failed. But you see those sorts of things leveraged into actual security problems.
Right.
So.
Well, just to throw another example out there, you're building an Express app with Node.js, right? And they have measures in there to help you protect against SQL injection, for example.
Awesome.
Right? And so you do a static analysis, and it says you're calling a direct format a string into a SQL query instead of using the safe way to do this.
Right.
And
parameterized kind of thing. Yeah.
And so, it's you can set your policy to block it, or you can set your policy to ignore it. And so if you have a good reason for it, just go ignore it. But then you're running these tools, to run security. I'm also aware that there are a lot of third-party tools that do security analysis on your code.
Yeah.
Do you integrate with any of those?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a bunch. My favorite is White Source. So it does a number of things. One of the cool things that White Source does is it has a database of all the CVEs, the common,
Yes.
Yeah. So it knows all of the open source and third-party tools that have security holes in them. And so it can scan your code and look for the dependencies that you take. And
that version of this NPM package has a security vulnerability.
Right.
Bad news.
You need to update to a newer version of LeftPad. Right.
Yeah.
And so, of course, it's a graph, right? Because you could keep on top of all of your dependencies.
Direct dependencies.
Yeah, exactly. But are they keeping on top of their dependencies? And so White Source takes care of that for you. It'll just walk the graph and identify the possible vulnerabilities that you have. And so you can run that nightly because this will happen, and you can run it at pull request time as part of that build, so that no developer can sneak something in there.
Stop the deploy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And that works for languages that aren't just C. It turns out.
Yeah, it works for a lot of languages.
Right. Yeah, your SQL injection attack was a good example. I don't talk to databases because I write C.
Right.
It's too hard. It's too hard to do that, so I just don't. Right.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of JavaScript developers are also starting to get into mobile development. So we're talking like React Native, NativeScript. What other ones out there? Ionic, which is basically Cordova.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you've got all these systems out there that do different stages or different methods of, writing code for mobile. So let's say that I want to run my CI machine. You mentioned Windows, Linux, and Mac, but I'm talking now iOS, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry. I don't know what else is out there, right?
Right. I don't see a lot of people asking for BlackBerry builds. So let's throw that one out for the time being.
Yeah. We'll treat that like the C programmers.
That's right. We'll just ignore them. But there's no problem. Mac OS does a fine job of building iOS. Linux does a fine job of building for Android. And so that's why we have all those build.
But I want to run my tests too.
So what I really like to do is use App Center. So when we acquired Xamarin a couple years ago, they had this like really insane test process that lets you test on any number of mobile devices. And so now that's a Microsoft product. And so that's what I used for my mobile app testing.
Right.
Yeah. And so, it is ultimately incredible to see the amount of various tests that you can run, because there's a lot of Android devices, right? And there's been a lot of iPhones over the years, but not the fragmentation of the market. Samsung is building devices, Google is building devices. So this will get you take care of you. I think it even tests Windows phones. Again, BlackBerry, I don't think so. But.
No, that makes sense. So you get it tested, and then the deployment is a little different as well, right? Because you want to push the app stores.
The deployment is different, but you can do that. So my buddy James Montemagno does exactly this. He has a CD system that will deploy to either the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.
Right.
Yeah. So he clicks a button in VSTS, and his new app goes to the store. It's incredible. I think he's got it documented on his blog.
Yeah. VSTS is code for Azure DevOps, right?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
No, I just like the reminder to people that, hey, look, this isn't a brand new product. They're not shaking out any bugs. They've just rethought the way that they're doing Visual Studio Team Services and made it a whole lot more approachable.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, sorry. The number of years I've talked about Visual Studio Team Services.
I totally get
it. It's a hard habit to break. But yeah, so Azure DevOps. Pardon me.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Are there any new features that are coming?
There are a ton of new features coming. So we kind of took a little break releasing features out into Azure DevOps while we were getting ready for the big new release, right?
That's pretty common. I've talked to people who've done keynotes at Microsoft events before, and it's like, yeah, we kind of stop fiddling with it at a certain point until we make our announcement.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than having Donovan Brown up on stage and he's showing off Azure DevOps, and we're like, oh, well, we just deployed a new feature, and breaking his entire script. So yeah, we don't do that. So we're gonna pick back up as soon as Ignite's over. We're gonna pick back up with the new features. We actually have a timeline on our website that discusses when we expect to launch some new features, and some of them are secret. So. Keep watching.
Surprise! This is
surprise.
Awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes something just lights up, like, oh, we've got a new preview feature. So we kind of slowly rolled out what became Azure DevOps before it was there, because we use feature flags, of course. And at some point, we'll give users the opportunity to turn on preview features. And so you could see the new navigation. You wouldn't see the new name. But all of a sudden, you would see the way Azure DevOps was about to look for you.
Right.
We kind of quietly snuck that one in there.
Yeah.
So we've just got this preview features tab, and you can just toggle things on. You can set your own feature flags, basically, at some point,
Right, once you're ready for people to start playing with it.
That's right. That's right.
One other thing that I'm a little curious about, so I use Visual Studio Code for my code editor.
Absolutely.
So what's the interplay between Azure DevOps and Visual Studio Code? Because, they have plugins for freaking everything for Visual Studio Code, and I'm assuming that there's something there that talks to Azure DevOps and helps me with some of this stuff.
Yeah, I'm like 90% sure there is. I'm not I'm a VI guy.
I'm going to have to go check. Oh, well, I'm an Emacs guy, but I installed the plugin for that. And now I get all the nice key bindings in Visual Studio Code along with all the nice stuff.
I thought we were getting along so well, and now I discover you're an Emacs guy.
Yeah.
No. Right. So So my main integration with, or the way I mostly think about Visual Studio Code is, through Git. And so it just supports that, right out of the box. And that's true whether you're using GitHub or Azure repos or...
Yeah, you just set up your private key or your authentication and go for it.
Exactly. But yeah, there are other opportunities there. So you can, look at maybe you want to assign a work item. And the way I'm used to doing that is just like, in a commit message, pound 42.
Yep.
And we'll link that up for you between Azure DevOps and between Azure repos and Azure boards. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities for better integration. And I know that we have a lot inside Visual Studio itself because I actually worked on that for a little while. But VS Code, I'm pretty sure it's there. I have to go look and remind myself.
Yeah, well, people can go search for extensions and see what the capabilities are.
Yeah.
And, I mean, mostly what we're talking about here is tools around the process of writing the code. And so the majority of things that Azure DevOps does for you aren't things that you necessarily need to see reflected in your code editor.
That's right.
But there are a few things where it's like, hey, I'm working on this task or item or user story or whatever it is, and maybe it just sucks all that up into a commit for you, or there are some convenience things that you could put in.
Totally.
But yeah.
Totally. Yeah, in my head, like we stopped trying to make everything in the IDE because when we started out with what was then Team Foundation Server, a decade ago, it was like rich and heavy in the IDE itself.
Right.
And we've just been pulling that out as fast and as much as possible, and to where it's not even there anymore.
Well, everybody's process is different, so that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I try not to think. We do have, IDE extensions, Visual Studio, IntelliJ IDEA. I'm sure there's something for VS Code, but it's not. It's not where I want to spend my time. Right. I like our website.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and like I said before, I think for the most part you're going to see it on the website. You're not going to be dealing with those things so much in your code editor.
Yeah, but again, everybody's different, so I don't want to. I don't want to tell somebody not to do that just because that's not the way I like to work.
Yeah, you get the message that Chuck pushed the master. No.
Need a little pop-up notification.
That's right.
It goes to your phone. The klaxons start going off.
There you go. Be prepared for the merge from hell.
Right.
Anyway.
That Chuck.
Yeah. The poor people that worked with him. Oh my gosh. If people want to stay on top of this, where do they go to get news and things like that?
Yeah, so, you can just go to azure.com/DevOps and, follow us on Twitter. We're at Azure DevOps.
Right.
And we got, all the new stuff is going to be announced right there.
Good deal. Where do people find you online?
Me, also on Twitter. I'm at Ed Thomson. That's Thompson without a P. ETHOMSON.
Awesome. Now, one thing that we do on this show is at the end we shout out about stuff we like. So it could be a TV show, it could be a coding tool. Anything, right? So do you have some things you want to shout out about? Some things you've been enjoying lately?
Is your job search stuck? Maybe you're not getting any interviews with employers, or maybe you are, but no job offers. Or you may be new and not even know where to start. This is Charles Max Wood, and I'm releasing a new course and ebook on how to find a job as a software developer. The course walks you through the process of finding the types of companies you want to work for, getting their attention, and putting your best foot forward as the candidate they want. I've coached dozens of developers in looking for jobs and have been able to help several people find jobs within 2 weeks to 2 months. So whether you're new to development, can't find a great job that fits what you want, or are looking for remote work from an area without a strong tech community, I can help. Go to getacoderjob.com and sign up today.
Oh, man. Can I give a shameless self-promotion?
Go for it.
So I also have a podcast. It's about Git.
Awesome.
It's all things Git. And actually, this is shameless self-promotion, I admit. But I have learned so much doing a podcast. I don't know if you feel the same way, but having guests on that, people are telling me about how they found security vulnerabilities. It's like, wow, that's incredible. So it's really exposed me to a whole world of things that I would have never known.
Good deal.
Yeah.
I'll have to check it out.
Oh, well, I appreciate it.
I'm a fan of Git myself.
Yeah. Well, we talk about C a lot. No, now I'm just trolling you.
I haven't written C for a long time.
You know what? I think that might be why I drink myself to sleep at night. So maybe I should stop.
Maybe.
No, I'm kidding.
All right, I've got a couple of shout-outs myself here that I'm going to throw out. I mentioned on the episode I did with Donovan that I'm looking for beta testers for my app for podcasters.
Awesome.
So if you're looking for something that will manage your podcasting workflow from scheduling guests all the way up to finding sponsors, that's what I'm working on. I started building it for myself, and then I started telling people about it, and then they started telling me that I had to give it to them. So I'm working that out. But I would like some beta testers to make sure that what I'm doing works for other folks. So yeah, just tweet at me, CMaxW, or email me, chuck@devchat.tv, and we'll hook that up. And then, the other thing I guess I'll shout out about here is just these Microsoft events. It's funny because the first one I got invited to was Microsoft Build. It was like 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. And it was because I knew the guys on .NET Rocks. And, so Richard and Carl reached out and said, do you want to come? And been coming to these things. And what's funny is that initially I thought, well, I'm not really a Windows guy. I'm not really a Microsoft guy. And what I've learned is that by coming out to these events, Microsoft's doing a lot of interesting stuff in a lot of spaces. And so I would definitely recommend to people to go to events that feel just outside of what you normally do. And then the other thing, and I know that's kind of expensive sometimes, but if one's coming near you, like if, for example, if you live near Orlando, that's where we are now, then you don't have to pay for a hotel or anything and you can just come. The other thing that I would recommend as well is that you go check out Azure and see what they're doing over there. I know that AWS, especially in the JavaScript space, has a lot of momentum. And they do a lot of things that are awesome. I'm not going to knock them because I use them and I like them. But one thing that I'm finding is that I've been playing a little bit with the cloud services offered by Azure. And in a lot of cases, they're a little bit easier to manage, or a lot easier to manage in some cases, than they are on AWS. Just through the web interface. And the API methods of managing these, I found are pretty much on par. There is an Azure plugin for Visual Studio Code that does some stuff that makes some of this stuff easier, like Azure Functions, for example. If you've ever tried to test an AWS Lambda on your own,
that is not a thing I've ever tried to do.
Yeah, don't.
Okay.
Because the only way to test it is to deploy it and then hit it.
Oh.
But with Azure Functions, the plugin will actually run runtime on your machine, so you can instrument it, which is really nice. And so there are things like that. So go check out some of the other cloud offerings and just see what's out there. But I've been really impressed with what Microsoft has done with Azure. And I think if you sign up for a new account, you get a couple $100 to try it for free. And there's a lot going on there. So I'm actually looking at it for a few things that I'm working on now. And, I may move some of the stuff off of AWS just because every time I have to log into AWS and upload a thing, it's just, it's a pain. So anyway, I'm not 100% sure how much easier that is on Azure, that particular thing, but some of the other ones and the scaling and the Docker support and all of that stuff it's killer over there. So anyway, well, thanks for coming, Ed.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up and we will be back next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.